you're listening, telling you that basically God loves you, and that's all you need to know. So that awareness of friendship really emphasizes the fact that without words even, you can be in Jesus' presence. Again, the simplicity of that comes across pretty powerfully, because when you start to gaze with love at another human being, and you find that that gaze is returned, that's powerful. Can you imagine gazing with love at Christ and being able to have that gaze returned to you? As a matter of fact, Teresa uses the idea of gazing with humility and love. Christ humble towards you, but it's the Christ who truly is and has sacrificed everything for us. That kind of awareness, I think, comes with maturity. It does not happen with somebody who perhaps has not tried some of the other prayer experiences. But I know that even if you're doing centering prayer now, or whether your prayer is just a verbal kind of prayer, that this begins to start to change you. As a matter of fact, to be alone with Jesus like this eventually begins to change you in such a way that you become one with Jesus. Teresa has a vision at one point. It's called an intellectual vision because it's not on the outside, it's within. And she said that she had a sense of Christ walking with her. The nearness and immediacy of that experience completely blew her mind. She had no awareness of exactly how to translate that except to know that God was that near. I would suggest to you that that's the path that we are all on. That central awareness, by the way, of the nearness of God is at the very, very core of the Carmelite experience, the Carmelite heroism. Before going further, I wanted to mention one other thing about this idea of prayer. Remember the woman at the well, the gospel story, the Samaritan woman who comes to the well? That really, truly moved Teresa. It was one of the things that she really held on to, as a matter of fact. It was something that was really important because she felt that the living water that Christ gave that woman was a living water that she hungered for. And to the point that she says, how many times do I recall the living water that the Lord told the Samaritan about? I am very fond of that gospel passage. Indeed, from the time I was a little child, without the understanding I have now, I often begged the Lord to give me the water. I always carried with me a painting of this episode of the Lord at the well. She literally would, not just this episode, but perhaps a picture of the Gethsemane, she would carry it with her. And she would, in a sense, refer to it. It was her way of bringing back Christ's presence at, obviously, a significant time. But to know that this was that important for her, and to know the water symbol was extraordinary for her. She lived in a Castile, a place or an area that was very barren, very dry, very desert-like. So you can imagine what water must have been for her. And a lot of the metaphors that she uses come from this idea of water and the image of water. I want to move on to the next one there. Let your life speak. I don't know if you've had the experience, but have you ever had the opportunity to really be able to write down some of the main transition times in your own life? Have you ever, in other words, been able to tell the story of your life? I think once you get into the range of 40s, 50s, for example, you begin to start to look back and you begin to sort of see how things have unfolded. The first reaction to that is, oh my God, what happened here? Oh, I regret that. Now, along with the regrets and the successes, you sort of leave those go. But Teresa says that if you look at your life in a completely different way, you're going to find something completely different. Here's a quote from her autobiography. And this autobiography is something that she really felt expressed who she was. From now on, This is another book of my life. A new one, because this is a new life, a life I wrote about up until this point was my own. The one I have been living since I began to share my teachings on prayer is a life God has been living in me. Let me read that one more time. She says, from now on, this is another book of my life, a new one because this is a new life, a life in Christ. This is not pious rhetoric, but you get to the point in your life where you look back and you say, look, I'm the one who's responsible for this successes and failures, yes. But was there anything else going on in my life? I like the metaphor of a thread. Was there a thread that, in a sense, wove its way through both the earth and eternity in my life? Were there moments in my life where I felt that there was something more, where there was a mystery that engaged me? And think of it in those terms. When did, in your life, when did mystery become apparent for you? Was it when you got married? Was it when you, in a sense, had your first child? Was it at a time when you felt as if nature was giving you, in a sense, her glory? And when did you feel the absence of mystery in your life? If you can recall a time where you felt as if you had nothing, both spiritually and also physically. Was it an illness that you suffered? When was mystery hidden in your life? Thinking of your life in those terms all of a sudden begins to transform it. And you begin to see that the real point here is that your life really is something that was given to you through God's love and mercy. This, I think, is what really, in a sense, Teresa is trying to say here. In one class that I had, it would be really interesting to do that here, we sort of talked about faith experiences. I was using it as an example, but I wasn't really becoming too, over-involved in it. And all of a sudden, as one after the other started to talk about the faith experience, you felt something in the room. There was a whole different perception, because what they, in a sense, were saying was, there seems to be two ways of looking at my life. One is ordinarily coming here to class, going on, getting a job, whatever my life has to hold. But the other one has to do with this depth dimension. And it's this depth dimension, I think, that really calls us back to what's really important in our lives. If you were seriously ill and you had to look at your life, would you look at it only from an ego standpoint of what you have accomplished and what you have regret? Or would you find yourself saying, my God, what a gift you have given to me. This is something that I cherish, but I know that there is only one thing that is true, and that this life is your love and mercy being offered to me. That is a completely different way of looking at the experience, and this is what Teresa does offer. I came across this. It says, our lives are as parchment, our actions and suffering are the ink. The work of the Holy Spirit is the pen, and God writes a living gospel. It gives you a sense that it's not about us. But I think you have to get to the point in your life where you recognize that there is something greater than what you are experiencing. Strive to be affable. This is not how to win friends. This basically is Teresa's word, affable. I didn't make this up. And she basically says, when she says strive to be affable as much as you can, to be affable and understanding in a way that everyone you talk to will love your conversation and desire your manner of living and acting. Love your conversation and desire your manner of living. Notice what's underneath there. If you are really, in a sense, your relationship with God is primary, then it's going to expose itself. And it's going to do that in the relationships that you have, in the friendships that you have. And this is what Teresa's getting at. By the way, she laughed a lot. There's no doubt about it that she got through life through laughter. And when you think of some of the things that she experienced, you certainly recognize that. This is a description from someone about what they heard with Teresa. Her speech was gracious and her conversation very gentle, serious, joyful, and plain. And she greatly entertained all the people who listened to her. She spoke with the same friendliness to all, addressing each person with joy, with love, without shyness, and with a holy and peaceful freedom. I think, in your community, our community here, we have many people like that. I think some of the things that I hear about our community is that we have the ability to be able to reach out. There's a warmth, there's a kind of reception that goes on here. And even tonight, with all of you, feeling that this program is giving you the kind of spiritual nourishment you need, that is the bond that begins to build. And here we're just talking about being affable, but being affable truly is the key. How many times do you not feel like smiling, says Teresa? Well then, you should be able to go out to others in a completely different way. Her spiritual friends were the ones that she really, truly appreciated because she could have an exchange with them. They pretty much knew where each other was coming from. The fourth one, be determined in your prayer and your calling. This determination, I think, is truly important. I would appeal to you, what was your prayer life like when it began? And God knows when that was, say in high school. You began to say prayers, for example. What was it like, and why did you give it up? Why did you let go of it? And I know in my case, the whole idea of a prayer life really boggled my mind because I thought there were certain things I had to do. It was almost like I was sort of taking up with the method of prayer. And what I lost out on was the spirit. And now I have a deep appreciation of a kind of childlike prayer, an open-hearted awareness as prayer. But when she's talking about being determined, she's basically saying, don't give up hope. Continue to be the person who is going to struggle and fight for your relationship with God. By the way, this is at the very center of desert spirituality. Why go to a desert? What do you meet there? Well, you meet really the very depths of your being, and you find yourself as a person who is broken and needs healing. Now, do all of a sudden, does this healing come overnight? No. It takes a while. You keep coming back to an appreciation of exactly how much or how important this healing is necessary. I have a thing here where she says, be confident, don't hold back your heart's desires, believe in the power of God. I am amazed by how much can be accomplished on this path by being bold and striving for great things. There is Teresa, truly, I think, as a spiritual giant. She's focusing on something there that most of us sort of timidly put aside, and that is, why don't you fight for your prayer? Why give up hope? Why back away so easily? She says, even if the soul is not quite strong, yet she can still lift off and take flight. I love that image. It's a freedom that you begin to experience with this kind of prayer. She says she can soar to great heights, but, and this is typical Teresa, like a fledgling bird, she may tire herself out and need to perch for a while. And Teresa said, listen, I know what I'm asking from you here is not easy. What you need to do is be able to see when you should be backing off. Don't pressure yourself. It's not a kind of determination with gritting your teeth. It's a determination that comes out of the joy of being alive and being one with God. The last one, let yourself be drawn by love. I think this is probably one of the more important ones because Teresa suddenly had to realize that she felt like she was searching for God when she found out, in fact, that God was pursuing her. Have you ever heard of the Hound of Heaven poem by Francis Thompson? A very powerful poem because it puts the metaphor of Hound of Heaven, obviously, in relationship to God. God really wants us. And as soon as you begin to see that as an important asset of your spirituality, you begin to think of yourself as trying to find God or look for God here and there. But as soon as you begin to say, God is looking for me, and right now God is looking at me, that gaze of love, there's a different awareness of your life, a different appreciation of it. This awareness or appreciation begins to build, and as a matter of fact, what ends up happening is you find yourself thinking is not necessary, this is Therese's words, is not necessary to think much, but to love much. She puts that really as a centerpiece. There's a quote from William Blake, "We are put on this earth a little space to bear the deeds of love." But this love really is in pursuit of us. And Theresa, recognizing this, especially at her conversion experience, began to work on accepting it. Many of us, as we're growing up, we want to be accepted by others. So we try to be accepted by people at school, we try to be accepted by people who are really, people that we really want us to notice. Well, I think one of the things that was important for Theresa was also to be accepted, but she found out that this acceptance was unnecessary, that what she needed to do was simply be open to the love that was already present. And that was a powerful turning around. This does not happen overnight. It's a kind of conversion experience. How hard it is to appreciate that I am truly loved by God. But to have that as the basis obviously changes everything and continues to show you that your journey really is not on your shoulders. It's really God's responsibility, reaching into your life and getting your attention. What I'd like to do here is just take a moment and ask if there's anybody who had something in mind in terms of what I was getting at, maybe some of the ideas that I was trying to explain didn't come across as clearly as possible. Or is there something that stuck out for you that seemed to resonate? Something about Therese's spirituality that seemed to give you a deeper appreciation of your own? Sure.
I would say for a deeper appreciation, there's so much of what you have shared tonight that really immediately the light bulb went on. That childlike faith is so powerful. I remember hearing that when I was younger and really wasn't aware that I was doing that, but the older I'm getting, the more I'm appreciating, the more aware I'm becoming of it, the more I see of it, its presence, outwardly, inwardly, and just the power of it in its simplistic manner. Mm-hmm. It's truly so simple and so powerful, and what a gift and how beautiful it plays out in life, in this, obviously in this particular situation in my life. And I'm truly, I feel as if God is really opening my eyes in that way and seeing so much more. His love, His presence, and how He's pursuing me. Again, there's so much that you've said that wow. So thank you.
No, you're very welcome. You know, as you were talking, of course, I'm thinking what you're referring to as childlike really is the intimacy. When you see a couple together and there's a kind of childlike, innocent way that they treat each other, there's a sense of reverence there, respect, but there's also mutuality that seems to be without the need of words. You just know that their presence is enough. That's what you end up having with Christ. You end up walking with Him, and as it was put, it's almost like if you were blind, you just recognize that there is another presence. You don't have to worry about making up a kind of Christless features or looking exactly how He looks. No, it's just the awareness of His presence. I went through a period where it was almost as if I had a sense that, okay, Christ is holding my shoulder, you know. At that stop, look, and listen, I would use that as a way of bringing myself back. And there is truly a spirit of vulnerability involved here, but it's the intimacy, I think, that continues to sort of feed your spirit and be able to give you something that you haven't had in the past, namely that reservoir of love. The open-heartedness, how many of us, just within the past week or so, have not really enjoyed children? This is Christmas time, you know? Enjoy the children in our lives running around, and even strangers' children that you don't even know if you watch them. And the innocence that they have, quite obviously, reminds you of an innocence that you may want to come home to yourself. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much for that. What I'd like to do now is turn to the interior castle. Yeah.
Mike.
The image of the castle was powerful for Teresa. It was something that she grew up with as a child. What it really does mean here, it's really a metaphor for the soul. And it's the soul that travels through, what you want, the person who travels through different stages. Believe it or not, this interior castle was written in 4 weeks by Teresa. And it wasn't even written with a chair and table. She was sitting on the side of by a windowsill, and she was writing away. It was almost as if it just came automatically for her. If you really take some of the aspects of her life and were able to sort of appreciate that, you can find that in the interior castle. Again, I go back to my original idea that this is all coming from her experience. And her experience basically is something that she was already able to express and put down on paper. The interior castle, of course, is a masterpiece. It holds together very well. And when you start to sort of move through the different sections, she calls them dwellings. She calls them dwellings. She feels that it's like your father's house. There are many dwellings on the inside. And she calls the outside of the castle a kind of, if you want, crystal ball. But watch yourself, because she's not really limiting it. Remember, this is the human soul. So it's alive, it's vibrant, and it's moving in all directions. So try to use your imagination when you think about it. Don't limit it to sort of a ball, and inside there are concentric circles, and each one of those circles represents something. No, try to allow it to loosen up for you in your imagination. One thing that she does use in this metaphor, she tries to get across, this metaphor will not work unless you can appreciate that God is present right now. You are in God. There's a little story where a little fish and a large fish, an older fish, are sort of swimming along in the sea, and the little fish basically says to the large fish, "Where's this water everybody's talking about?" And the large fish says, "Keep swimming." "Where's this God everybody's talking about?" "Keep breathing." This appreciation that your very breath is God's gift is the nearness of God. Teresa would say, if you do not hold on to that, you will have nothing in terms of what your spirituality means. You will have no place or no platform, no basis for it. And as a matter of fact, John of the Cross and Teresa both emphasize this nearness of God, this omnipresence of God. And if there's one thing I want you to leave tonight with, it was the appreciation of God as being here now amongst us, but also within you. Now, again, that's not easy, because as soon as you begin to think that way, your life begins to take shape. because the love abides in you, how do you respond to it? That's Teresa's question. How do you respond to it? Is there something that I can do in order to appreciate that love in a way that I have not been before? When you fall asleep tonight, you fall asleep not, in a sense, alone. Even if you're alone in that bed, you're falling asleep in Christ. So you see, this becomes an ongoing prayer for you, and it's an awareness that perpetuates itself. Teresa would say you'll receive consolation from this. There will be a sense, for example, that you'll be able to appreciate the depths of your own prayer experience. I have to mention to you, there was a circumstance that I was in. I was 7 or 8 years old, and I was deathly afraid of the deep end of the pool, the 8 feet end of the pool. And I remember standing at the edge of that poolside very often thinking, my God, if I jump into that, I'll be thrashing around and I'll drown for sure. Well, one fine day, I think, when I was 8-ish, I guess, one of my friends, who is no longer a friend, one of my friends hit me in the back, and there I went. Well, instead of thrashing, I simply sunk down straight. And it was a weird and eerie kind of feeling, because all of a sudden there was no sound, but just the feeling, the soft feeling of the water. And when I reached the bottom, it was almost as if the water was embracing me. And for a moment, I felt a sense of peace. Now, I'm trying to be exaggerating here, but I remember it as if this was yesterday. And then very slowly, I stayed there. I didn't struggle, which was amazing. But I slowly allowed myself to sort of float to the top with just a few arm movements. When I got to the top, I sort of dog paddled over to the side. To this day, I remember that as a way that Teresa would talk about recollection. There's a kind of inner peace that comes over you when you begin to center yourself on God's presence. And when I go back to talking about this in the same way that I'm speaking to you right now, that's one of the images that comes back. That would be called, in Teresa's mind, active recollection. Something you did, in other words, in order to bring this all about. She also had passive recollection. Passive recollection is like, tonight if you went home after this, you're tired, but you're not tired enough to go to bed. You don't want to turn on the television set. So what you're doing is you're sitting there in front of the set, and basically you have this feeling that comes over you. And it's a feeling of God's presence just wanting to be. And you find the moment that just resting there is enough. That is passive recollection. It's, in a sense, coming from without and being able to sort of give you that deeper sense of inner peace. Those are important terms. Recollection is not a big deal. It's being in the presence of. Now, you notice, though, for example, there are all kinds of examples where we're being twisted in the wind nowadays with all kinds of responsibilities and things that really captivate us. It's very difficult to talk about recollection. To stop, wait for a while, and be able to be present to yourself. This is really what recollection is, to be in God's presence. Okay, let me take a look here at the very first dwelling place, if you would. By the way, I made up these titles. Shadow play really means sort of like a unreal kind of existence. And you'll see why in a minute. Teresa said in this first dwelling place, what you end up having is a lack of self-knowledge. Now listen carefully. This idea of self-knowledge is central to her. She says basically, we do not know how fractured we are as human beings. Our heart truly is in pieces. And basically what she means by that is we are so preoccupied with so many things that we really don't know where we stand. That is what the fractured, if you want, heart is about. What is fracturing us? By the way, not terrible things, business, pleasures, family, friendships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We just sort of bring out the whole list of things. They're all good in themselves, but together, what they do is they create a noise. If the God of love is calling out to you, which is what is happening, how are you able to hear anything in the chaos of your life? Again, being able to recollect yourself is really Teresa's answer. By the way, the preoccupation, I went to the doctor's the other day, and when I was in the waiting room, I looked around me. Everybody had a cell phone. I felt I was in the middle of some kind of ritual. But there's a sense here, as you can see what I'm talking about, the preoccupation. Technology has had a way of mesmerizing us. And just to be able to sort of back away from that for any period of time loosens up your spirit tremendously. And that may be one example. Another one is, I don't realize sometimes just how powerful our cultural norms are. Our social norms, the expectations. We think of them as being sort of stable, that we say yes or no to, we're in charge of our lives. Absolutely not. How many of you, and boy, I'm sort of revealing too much here, but Euclid Beach Park on the east side. Do you remember, raise your hands if you want to. Okay, great, oh good, thank you very much. There was a ride there called the Rotor.
Oh.
What you would do is you would walk in, and it was circular, and it was padded walls all around. Boy, God forbid if you didn't know what you're getting yourself into. It was quite a surprise.
Yes.
What would happen is it would start to turn, and it turned faster and faster and faster. And as it's turning, you obviously, because of the centrifugal force, you're plastered against that wall. And you find that the platform that used to be underneath you is starting to float away. That being pulled to the circumference, the outside of the interior castle, that's what Teresa is talking about. And I think sometimes you wake up, it's the kind of horror story, really, if you want. Because there's a sense that people are really unaware of just how powerful this kind of influence can be. Now, standing up here and saying all of this, obviously, gives a very negative impression. But this is basically what Teresa's getting at. Look, if you are not preoccupied, then you are going to wake up. You wake up to this world is much more than what you think it is. I remember taking a walk in North Chagrin Reservation, and there were two women, probably mid-70s, who had a map out, were standing in the midst of one of the trails. And they were talking to one another, and then there was a little bit of arguing going on. And as I approached, I asked what was going on, and they said, well, can you tell us where Chardon Road is? And I gave them the direction, and then I started to walk away. And as I'm walking away, they were still arguing about what they wanted to do. Return, go forward, et cetera, et cetera. And the arguing had continued to a point where you just recognized that they should have come to a conclusion. This confusion is created by having so many different options that you think are all viable, that you begin to forget that if you want purity of heart, as Kirtland, purity of heart is to will one thing. And this is what Teresa's getting at. What is the one thing that you want to place at center in your existence? Teresa's answer to all of this is prayer. And this idea of prayer is not just saying prayers. For her, prayer is listening. And by listening, I mean with the perception that God is really, in a sense, trying to get your attention. spontaneously and ongoingly trying to sort of say to you, I love you. And if you're not listening to that, obviously you've been preoccupied and there's nothing that you're going to be able to do about it. The noise is too great. But let's say that you do start to listen. What you begin to realize is that my life really has a kind of depth dimension to it. That guess what? There is mystery in so much around me. There's an appreciation here that I have to become more and more aware of. Then you realize that what you're doing is receiving. And when you receive this kind of love, guess what? It frees you up from all those preoccupations. You begin to see differently. I mean, I would love to have a show of hands here of how many people, because they found that they were more and more able to just will one thing, appreciate the fact that God was going to be central for even a short period of time, felt that other things became less important. John of the Cross and Teresa both realized one thing. You are not going to change unless there is a greater love. If you're addicted, or if you're trying to go through some changes, you're going to stay with that until you find that there is a love that is greater than the one that you're experiencing right now. Only then will real change take place. That, of course, is grace. And we're talking about here real conversion. Teresa said that once you are freed up, quite obviously, you begin to become more appreciative. I would say of the wonder of life, but again, it's the recognition that there's a depth dimension to your life that is more than what you may be experiencing right now with your preoccupations. The second dwelling, hearing the call of love in a personal way. Teresa feels, and this